Thus, Donald Trump challenged Canada this morning in a public, personal, and forceful manner through a string of social media assaults and an impromptu press briefing where he labeled Mark Carney as unappreciative, warned of the toughest financial penalties ever placed on a purported partner, and basically provoked Canada to react. Mark Carney replied in mere hours, not via statements, but through deeds. A crushing triple-layered retaliation, a public debunking of Trump's assertions using solid facts, a prompt array of financial actions aimed at Trump's voter support, and a synchronized backing from 5 partner countries that arrived within 90 minutes of Carney's speech. When Wall Street ended the day, the financial sectors had issued their judgment. Carney triumphed, and it wasn't even competitive. However, the true narrative isn't the strategies or the financial feedback. The true narrative is what this interaction disclosed about the two figures. One arrived with slurs. The other arrived with a scheme. One ad-libbed during a press session. The other unleashed a ready-made reply bundle that had been simulated, aligned with partners, and adjusted to cause utmost political harm with least financial expense. This wasn't an equal contest. This was spontaneity against readiness, and readiness prevailed decisively. Warren Buffett's evaluation of this interaction was the sharpest remark he has offered on guidance throughout the whole commerce dispute. What he stated regarding the contrast between figures who respond and figures who foresee, and what that contrast expenses a nation, is something every elector must listen to. Sign up immediately, since this tale alters how you comprehend this whole dispute. Here's how the day progressed, and I wish to guide through this nearly moment by moment because the schedule is what exposes the disparity. At 6:30 this morning, a previously taped conversation with Mark Carney broadcast on Canadian Breakfast TV with parts adopted by U.S. channels in the following hour. In the conversation, Carney serenely addressed Canada's commerce expansion advancements, the fresh mutual pacts with the EU and Indo-Pacific countries, the power shipment facilities under construction toward Atlantic and Pacific ports, the partner collaborations that have restructured Canada's financial framework in less than 2 years. It was balanced, evidence-based, and intentionally subtle. The sort of conversation that in ordinary periods would receive a short reference on U.S. finance stations and little else. But one phrase pierced through everything. Carney stated, "Canada's financial destiny is no longer captive to the choices of any one commerce associate. We have constructed a sturdy, varied, independent economy, and we achieved it in under 2 years. Captive, one commerce associate." He voiced the unspoken part aloud. Canada no longer requires America. And Donald Trump noticed it. Per White House insiders, Trump was viewing Fox Business in the living quarters when the part played. He allegedly turned to a helper and said, "Did you catch what this fellow just mentioned about us?" The helper hadn't viewed it. It was irrelevant. Trump had already grabbed his device. By 7:15 a.m., Trump was sharing 6 shares in 45 minutes. The initial labeled Carney the most unappreciative figure of any nation and asserted Canada would be insignificant without America. The next charged Canada with exploiting the United States for years and said Carney was appearing on TV to boast about it. The third warned of the toughest financial penalties ever placed on a purported partner. Shares 4 through 6 became individual, criticizing Carney's Goldman Sachs history, naming him a worldwide advocate, doubting if he was truly Canadian due to his time managing the Bank of England, and asserting Canada's economy was a catastrophe that only endures because America permits it. 6 shares in 45 minutes. Each one more furious than the previous, each one less logical than the prior one, and each one pushing the president deeper into a bind. Because each open warning requires execution, and none of these warnings had been examined, evaluated, or synchronized with the individuals who would have to carry them out. His own National Economic Council head allegedly discovered the share from a CNN alert on his device. The Secretary of Commerce learned when a journalist phoned seeking reaction. The Commerce Group was caught unaware. No one in the whole structure of U.S. financial administration knew this was approaching because there was nothing to anticipate. It was sheer whim. A person with a device and a complaint sharing before his own administration was alert. Then arrived the press briefing. At 8 a.m., Trump halted on the White House South Grass prior to leaving for a gathering and intensified all he'd shared on live TV to cameras transmitting to every media center worldwide. He went beyond the shares. He declared 3 particular financial actions: possible banking limitations on Canadian monetary organizations functioning in the United States, a prompt halt on Canadian power shipments, and feasible start of USMCA exit processes. 3 particular warnings issued on live TV. None of them debated with the financial group ahead. None of them inspected by the commerce policy personnel. None of them judged for legal viability, market effect, or unexpected outcomes. One of his top financial consultants was noticeable in the rear, allegedly on the call in moments, attempting to evaluate if the president's spontaneous pledges were even lawfully feasible. Another consultant was observed with their face in their palms. The Canadian reply was already in preparation before Trump concluded speaking, and here's the snare he constructed for himself without recognizing it. By issuing particular warnings openly and on video, Trump bound himself. Retracting them would appear feeble, and Trump never retracts anything. Proceeding would mean enacting strategies that his own group hadn't appraised, and that, as Carney would shortly illustrate with crushing accuracy, would damage America much more than they would damage Canada. He generated a no-win scenario for himself before 9 in the morning, and the opposing side hadn't even commented yet. So that was the challenge. Individual, forceful, unsynchronized, executed on whim after viewing a TV conversation at 6:30 in the morning, including particular warnings that the president's own financial group discovered by observing the updates. 3 warnings that pushed the president into a bind he couldn't evade without either injuring his own nation or embarrassing himself, all presented before most of Washington had completed their initial mug of Java. Markets began at 9:30 a.m., anxious and fluctuating. Power equities oscillated dramatically. The Canadian currency dropped at first as dealers factored in the doubt, which is what doubt produces. It generates apprehension, and apprehension generates liquidation. Trump supporters highlighted the market feedback as evidence that the challenge was effective. Observe, Canada's money is falling. They're frightened. But seasoned dealers understood more. They were anticipating the opposing side's reply. Because in any clash, the initial action informs you about hostility. The counteraction informs you about tactics. And tactics is what markets truly value. The inquiry for the subsequent 4.5 hours was, how would Carney reply? Would he counter hostility with hostility? Would he intensify? Would he retreat? Would he attempt to calm via official paths? The reply, when it emerged, disclosed something that alters how we ought to comprehend this whole commerce dispute. For 4.5 hours following Trump's challenge, Mark Carney uttered nothing, utterly nothing. No open declaration, no social media reply, no representative update, no off-record discussions to journalists. Absolute total quiet. Media guessed ceaselessly. Experts argued if Carney was surprised. Trump supporters rejoiced on every accessible forum. Fox News displayed a banner that stated, "Canada quiet after Trump demand." Traditional analysts announced early success. He's scared to reply. Canada recognizes it's overwhelmed. One Trump supporter appeared on cable updates and said, "This is what occurs when a theater instructor's successor attempts to engage tough with the head of the free globe." The assurance was complete. The misunderstanding was disastrous because the quiet wasn't reluctance, it was set up. In the background, Carney's group wasn't debating what to execute. They were triggering what they'd already assembled. The reply bundle had been assembled weeks prior. One of numerous ready-made counterattack procedures crafted in simulation for precisely this type of incitement. Carney's tactical group had pinpointed 6 probable Trump intensification situations during strategy meetings the prior month. Situation 3 was tagged open individual assault financial warnings unsynchronized. Today was situation 3. The guide was already composed. The counteractions were already outlined. The partner declarations were already pre-endorsed. The 4 and 1/2 hours were utilized for 3 items solely. ultimate synchronization discussions with partner figures to verify their pre-endorsed declarations were prepared for dissemination on cue. Confirmation that the financial counteractions were lawfully initiated and functionally prepared to implement and schedule adjustment, because the reply was crafted to arrive at 12:30 p.m. after the market had completely factored in the apprehension and doubt from Trump's warnings, but prior to the dealing day concluded, enhancing the market influence of the counterattack when it flipped the story. Even the schedule was tactical. Even the quiet was a tool. At 12:30 p.m., Carney presented a 15-minute talk from the Chamber of Parliament. Serene, balanced, fact-intensive, every phrase referenced, every assertion confirmed. The antithesis of Trump's dawn in every imaginable aspect. He deconstructed each of Trump's 3 warnings with particular, referenced, separately confirmed financial facts, and he did it without elevating his tone once on banking limitations. Carney observed that Canadian monetary organizations possess $2.4 trillion in worldwide holdings and handle over $600 billion in transboundary deals yearly. He clarified with the endurance of a teacher speaking to a faltering pupil that Canadian banks aren't marginal to U.S. finance, they're integrated into it. Limiting them wouldn't penalize Canada. It would initiate successive interruptions in U.S. credit sectors, home loan handling, and transboundary business deals that U.S. enterprises rely on daily. He said, "We invite the president to discuss with his own banking overseers before issuing assurances his setup cannot endure." On the power shipment halt, Carney highlighted that the United States brings in 60% of its raw oil from Canada, not 20%, not 30, 60. A shipment halt would elevate U.S. fuel costs by an approximated $1.40 per gallon in 30 days. He referenced 3 separate power experts by title from Goldman Sachs, the IEA, and Wood Mackenzie, providing the figure the authority of agreement instead of biased debate. He said, "We urge the president to clarify that calculation to U.S. buyers refilling their vehicles. Maybe he can do it at one of his fuel stop picture chances." On USMCA exit, Carney's lawful group had pre-assembled a legal examination indicating that exit demands 6 months alert in direct legislative participation under Article 34.6 of the Pact. The president cannot exit by administrative command, by media meeting, or by social media share. Carney said, "We recommend the president review the pact he endorsed. It is very explicit on this matter. We are pleased to dispatch him a duplicate if he has lost his." Each refutation was serene, particular, and crushing. Carney didn't elevate his tone. He didn't slur Trump individually. He didn't counter hostility with hostility. He employed figures, and figures in a commerce battle are more crushing than descriptors. At the same time with the talk, Canada triggered focused financial countermeasures, not wide vengeful duties. Those are crude tools that injure all, including the nation applying them. These were exact, accurate, crafted with the cool accuracy of a reserve banker who devoted his profession comprehending precisely where the stress spots are in a monetary setup. First, prompt pause of potash shipment support to 6 U.S. farming regions: Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, Indiana, Missouri, Ohio, Canada, provides roughly 30% of the globe's pot, the vital nutrient without which U.S. harvests cannot develop. Without potash, corn outputs fall by 30 to 40%. Soybeans turn financially impractical. The schedule was intentional, before sowing period when growers are submitting their nutrient requests for the year. The regions were intentional. Farming core regions with Republican lawmakers who would sense the stress instantly, whose communication lines would activate in hours, whose voters would be positioned in agricultural provision outlets at vacant racks, and posing very direct inquiries about the commerce battle they'd been informed was being secured. Second, official alert to 3 key conduit managers that volume distribution assessments would emphasize Pacific and Atlantic shipment pledges over U.S.-directed streams. This wasn't a striking declaration. It was documentation, the type of subtle functional indicator that power sectors interpret immediately and value correspondingly. U.S. processing plants reliant on Canadian dense raw, and there are many of them focused in the Midwest and Gulf Coast, encountered prompt doubt about intermediate-term provision. The step didn't sever oil. It did something more tactically refined. It compelled U.S. power firms to include provision doubt, which increases expenses, which increases buyer rates, which generates political stress. Third, Canadian retirement funds and organizational financiers obtained formal direction to speed up what Ottawa terms independent hazard variation, the courteous administrative phrase for withdrawing Canadian funds from U.S. sectors and rerouting it elsewhere. Over $400 billion in reliable, extended organizational funds that U.S. debt sectors and stock sectors depend on for flow and steadiness now being vigorously rerouted toward European, Asian, and Commonwealth sectors. The funds doesn't depart immediately, but the indicator does. And sectors react to indicators. Carney didn't counter broadly. He countered accurately. Every action aimed a group that Trump requires politically. Every action produced discomfort in areas that elect Republican. Every action was crafted not to penalize Canada's adversary, but to make Canada's adversary's electors require that their own figures resolve the issue. That's the distinction between counterattack and tactics. Counterattack is fury. Tactics is making the opposing side's individuals perform your task for you. And then arrived the alliance. This is the segment that discloses the complete extent of what Carney had assembled. Within 90 minutes of Carney's talk, 5 partner figures released synchronized open declarations. The United Kingdom observed that Canada's balanced reply contrasts sharply with the inciting speech from Washington. Japan reconfirmed obligatory pledges with Canada and voiced worry about one-sided financial warnings between partner countries. The European Union referenced the rule that commerce conflicts should be settled through conversation and founded systems, not open warnings and social media demands. Australia reconfirmed its tactical collaboration with Canada and dedication to guidelines-based global commerce. South Korea voiced grave worry about uninstigated financial warnings against partner countries and restated its own commerce pacts with Ottawa. 5 partner countries, 5 declarations, 90 minutes, everyone disapproving of the United States, encouraging of Canada. That sort of synchronization does not occur in actual time. It does not occur naturally. You cannot obtain 5 state heads to concur on meal in 90 minutes, let alone release accurately phrased official declarations. This occurs when Carney's group had contacted those figures before Trump's challenge, days or weeks prior, and said, when this transpires, and it will transpire, here's what we require from you. Here's your pre-endorsed phrasing. Here's the schedule. Await our cue. And when the cue arrived at 12:30 p.m., 5 administrations were prepared. The challenge that was intended to separate Canada rather separated America. Trump attempted to make Canada appear feeble by challenging them openly. Within hours, 5 countries had openly aligned with Canada against the United States. The official calculation was crushing. 1 country positioned solitary, yelling. 6 countries positioned united, communicating serenely. Trump believed he was initiating a conflict. He was entering a trap. Carney had been anticipating this challenge, had assembled the reply, synchronized the partners, prepared the counter-actions, established the schedule. The only item he required from Trump was the activation. And Trump, precisely on plan, supplied it at 7:15 a.m. with a device and a complaint. And once you grasp that Carney was anticipating that every component of the counterattack was pre-assembled and prepared for implementation, the whole interaction interprets differently. Return to the start and consider what each side contributed to this clash. Trump contributed 6 social media shares composed on whim. Carney contributed a 247-page financial influence appraisal of every warning Trump could reasonably issue with pre-composed refutations for each one. Trump contributed 3 unexamined warnings issued on live TV. Carney contributed 3 exact counteractions that had been inspected by economists, endorsed by counsel, authorized by lawful advisors, and simulated for secondary impacts. Trump contributed his fury. Carney contributed 5 partner countries with pre-endorsed declarations awaiting a cue. Trump contributed a device. Carney contributed a tactics. That imbalance between whim and readiness, between response and foresight, between loudness and accuracy, is not merely the tale of this specific day. It's the tale of this whole commerce dispute. And today, for the initial time, that imbalance was evident to the whole globe in a sole 12-hour period. There was no vagueness, no interpretation that could hide it, no story that could reshape it. One side was prepared, the other side was furious. And the market, the partners, the lawmakers, and the chroniclers all observed the identical item. Let me place this in context. The banking warning that Trump issued at 8 a.m. Carney's group had simulated the outcomes of banking limitations 3 weeks prior. They understood that Canadian monetary organizations are so profoundly integrated in U.S. sectors that limitations would produce more harm to U.S. credit, home loan handling, and business transactions than to Canadian banks. They had the $2.4 trillion number assembled. They had the transboundary transaction amount assembled. They had the titles of U.S. sectors that would be interrupted assembled. When Trump issued the warning, Carney's group didn't require to investigate anything. They accessed a directory, the power shipment halt warning. Carney's power department had executed the provision simulations months ago. They understood the 60% reliance number. They understood the per gallon cost influence. They had reached the 3 separate power experts and obtained approval to reference their estimates by title. When Trump warned to halt Canadian power shipments, Carney's group didn't rush to locate facts. They retrieved it from a rack, the USMCA exit warning. Carney's lawful group had assembled a 14-page legal examination of the exit procedure before Trump ever referenced it. They understood it demanded legislative participation. They understood the 6-month alert duration. They understood the automatic return provisions. They even had the particular article number 34.6 prepared to reference on video. Every sole refutation was pre-investigated, pre-confirmed, and pre-bundled. This degree of readiness doesn't occur by chance. It occurs when a figure takes the position earnestly enough to foresee what's approaching and assemble the instruments to reply before the emergency comes. And it discloses something uneasy about the opposing side. If your warnings can be pre-refuted, it signifies your warnings are foreseeable. And if your warnings are foreseeable, it signifies you're not reasoning, you're responding. And a responsive figure in a tactical dispute is a figure who has already failed. They just don't recognize it yet. And then Warren Buffett presented what may be the most crushing appraisal of presidential capability in the whole commerce dispute. Not the most theatrical, not the noisiest, the most crushing, because Buffett doesn't handle in theater. He handles in appraisal. And his appraisal of what he observed progress today sliced deeper than any political remark could. Addressing at a Berkshire Hathaway investors occasion that night, Buffett began with a rule he's implemented to every funding choice he's issued in 7 decades. In 70 years of appraising firms, he said, I've discovered one item that pertains to every enterprise, every funding, and every figure. Readiness is the sole, most dependable sign of capability. When a CEO enters and profits discussion with replies for inquiries that haven't been posed yet, I'm assured. When a CEO enters and ad-libs, I'm anxious. And I'm anxious for a cause, because ad-libbing in high-risk scenarios is not innovation. It's lack of preparation. And lack of preparation in enterprise and in administration always has an expense. The only inquiry is how big the invoice. He stopped. Then he stated the phrase that every monetary source would headline with by dawn. What I observed today was one figure ad-lib and another figure prepare. And the result was totally foreseeable, because the result is always the identical. Readiness succeeds. It succeeds in conference rooms. It succeeds in sectors. And today, it succeeded in global connections. Buffett then guided through the interaction with the systematic accuracy of an investor appraising administration excellence, the item he devoted his whole profession executing better than anyone else living. The president issued 3 particular financial warnings on live TV this morning. None of them had been appraised by his financial group. None had been inspected for legal viability. None had been simulated for market influence or unexpected outcomes. One of them, the USMCA exit warning, isn't even within the president's one-sided power. He warned something he cannot lawfully execute, and he did it on video to the whole globe without verifying first. Canada's